In this segment, we will reconsider the narrative of American expansion into the West from within a different ontological context, that of the 1960s and after. We will note at the outset that the events of the latter part of the 19th century did not change, but we will see how historical and cultural changes altered how they were perceived by Americans. The sense of American mission, this idea that the United States is destined to spread democracy and liberty, persisted until after World War II. That conflict, in many ways, represented the apex of America's self-perceived role as the global defender of democratic values. The United States emerged from the war as the world's first superpower, wealthy and powerful and generally internationally recognized as a force for good. However, World War II also reopened deep societal wounds within the United States, particularly concerning civil rights. At the same time, the U.S. abandoned its traditional isolationist stance, assuming the mantle of a global defender of freedom, a role that would lead it into a protracted ideological struggle with the Soviet Union known as the Cold War. During this time, the United States engaged in several conflicts abroad, most notably in Korea and Southeast Asia. Initially, these interventions were framed as efforts to defend democracy against communist aggression. Yet, as the situation in Vietnam escalated, it became apparent that the American involvement was less about promoting democracy and more about supporting colonial interests that were increasingly at odds with the aspirations of the local population. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which passed almost unanimously, exemplified the initial support for the Vietnam War. However, as the conflict dragged on, Americans began to realize that their government's actions did not align with the stated objectives of defending democracy. The use of the draft further exacerbated public discontent, leading to a widespread anti-war movement. By the mid-1970s, the confidence that had characterized American society after World War II had eroded. The loss in Vietnam, coupled with the Watergate scandal and other cultural shifts, prompted Americans to question their role in the world and the very idea of spreading liberty. In the scholarly debates of the 1970s, a significant shift occurred regarding the perception of American expansionism. This evolution of thought is vividly illustrated in Patricia Limerick's seminal work, The Legacy of Conquest, published in 1983. Limerick's book starkly opposes the Turner thesis, a previously dominant narrative that celebrated the westward expansion of the United States as a manifestation of American progress and democracy. Contrary to Frederick Jackson Turner's optimistic view, Limerick portrays the westward expansion as a series of egregious acts driven by avarice. Her narrative suggests that Americans, motivated by the pursuit of profit, inflicted environmental destruction, perpetrated violence, and usurped resources in the West. This reinterpretation marks a departure from Turner's narrative, proposing instead that these actions constituted a crime against both the land and its inhabitants. This critical perspective is emblematic of a broader movement among historians of the era, who began to question and reassess the narrative surrounding the American West. This cohort, known as the historians of the New West, did not suggest that the historical events themselves had altered, but argued that the lens through which these events were viewed had shifted. This change in perspective did not stem from a transformation in the events of the past, but from a transformation within the historians themselves. The ontological shift, the fundamental change in the nature of being and understanding, challenges us to reevaluate our historical narratives based on contemporary values and knowledge. The importance of this ontological shift becomes clear when comparing the outlooks of Turner and Limerick. Turner's work is imbued with a sense of American ascendancy and territorial expansion as a positive force, whereas Limerick's analysis suggests a decline, highlighting the exploitative and destructive aspects of American expansion. This dichotomy underscores the necessity for historians to transcend their contemporary biases and endeavor to understand the past from the perspectives of those who lived it. While this approach does not excuse or condone the morally reprehensible actions of historical figures, it allows for a more nuanced understanding of their motivations and justifications within their historical context. Thus, the task for historians is not merely to judge the past through the lens of present-day values, but to empathetically inhabit the worldviews of historical actors. By doing so, historians can appreciate the complexity of historical narratives, recognizing that each account holds elements of truth and falsehood, contingent upon the ontological framework from which it is viewed. The debate between Turner's and Limerick's interpretations exemplifies this complexity, suggesting that the truth of the American expansion lies within a nuanced understanding of these contrasting perspectives, each valid within its own ontological context. In the next and final segment of this module, we will take a look at some definitions pertinent to historical studies. Please proceed to answer the questions in the assignment on Canvas. If you have any questions, you can post them in the open forum discussion or contact the professor using Canvas email.